Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And you know what? Rugby season, right? We talked about it in the last show. We talked about it's here. Camden's actually having to manage his schedule, but folks,
Because I
I
don't
got
normally.
out. No, he doesn't normally. It's just willy nilly. That's right. Uh, but yesterday I got to go out, and this will be a couple of weeks later. Got to go out and watch some of the Rugby Town Sevens tournament, the championship day of it. And thank you. I got to give a shout out to the Glendale, Colorado Chamber of Commerce, who helped me. Didn't help me, gave me. I guess helped me get in the gate without having to push people over. Gave me tickets to the game. So, Camden, when's y'all's first match?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I don't actually know. We're in full preseason mode right now. We're going to be scrimmaging today, though, so I can give you that much.
All right, all right. Well, I was trying to sneak one in there because he knows when it is. He's just not allowed to say it, but that didn't work.
Come
So
on, I'm media
uh,
trained.
he's well trained. And speaking of training, great segue though. By the way, I will say great segue to this because we're talking with our good friend Tim Lupinacci about leadership training and how to grow into being a great leader, which, of course, excites me. That's like my favorite hobby is leadership. And Tim, the first thing that popped in my mind when I read your bio and I read what you got going on is you're you're the anomaly because you've grown up in the business, in that business. I mean, it unless you're a 30-year military guy, it doesn't happen. What was that like going from, wet behind the ears to running the company?
Wow. Well, Otis and Cam, thank you very much for having me. And I do want to come back to rugby. It's an interesting thread because I have a recent story in a recent book I read that I'm sure you all read.
Oh,
Oh,
but
And
perfect.
hey, we could always pause anytime
oh,
you want and talk
well, I was
rugby
going
in
to
this
say
show.
I just finished the book Legacy about the New Zealand All
Oh,
Blacks, and thought it was really
mm-hmm.
insightful leadership tips and framework. And then when I gave it actually out to our board members last week at a board meeting, and then I was reminded that I guess the Rugby World Cup starts pretty soon in France. So all things rugby,
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
right?
it does. 3 weeks. I think it's three
Yep.
weeks. Well, when the show's out, it should be 1 week to 10 days
Yeah,
or so.
sorry for that
So,
digression. So no, I did. You were exactly right, Otis, about coming out from law school being wet behind the ears because I've had no intention to be a lawyer. I didn't grow up. I didn't know lawyers, and I literally think I kind of stumbled into it because I was a mass comm major and took a media law course, and I thought the First Amendment and all that was very interesting. And I thought I would take the LSAT. So anyway, I got to law school and came out and was working for a firm not really knowing what I was doing. And it really did set the course of my journey because early on I had a mentor who was a very tough boss and could get very angry. And I viewed the law as a very transactional type deal because I would get a project, I would do it, I would turn it in and forget about it and do the next project. And I'd been working on a project with a more senior attorney that we were doing for our boss and finished it, turned it in. I forgot about it until he paged us to come to his office. And he was on a phone call with about a dozen lawyers from across the country. And he starts yelling at us about how we had made a mistake in what we had done. And it was a lot of financial calculations, which I hadn't gone to law school to be a accountant, but it was the project. And so we had absolutely messed up some counting and double counted something pretty significant. And he then said, "These idiots are going to stay here all night and fix it." I don't think that's not good leadership, but that was the reality. And I'm thinking, I'm going to lose my job. I don't even know what I'm doing here. But we did work on it, got it fixed, sent it back out after midnight, as I recall, to all the other lawyers. And then I had the short straw to pick up our boss and drive him to the court hearing the next day that we were talking about and introducing this evidence in the court. And it was a very awkward, quiet for the first. It was about an hour and a half drive, very awkward. And I'm
ooh,
literally thinking
ooh.
this may be my last day at the firm, right? He has to keep me here for the hearing. But after a while, he says, the first thing I want to do is I want to apologize. I shouldn't have yelled at you in front of others, which I thought, well, that was pretty, that was a unique, I'd not heard him do that before. And I thought that I learned a little bit from that. But then he said the reason he was so angry was because he saw in me some leadership skills and abilities, and that he needed me to own projects and not just think about it, and transactionally and get it done. And I'd never really had someone talk into me about being a leader. And so that really did lead me on a 30-year journey now. Kind of like what you were saying, Otis, I became kind of like just leadership junkie or whatever. I really get fired up talking and reading and studying about it, but I didn't know anything about it 30 years ago. But it got me thinking. It just said, oh, well, maybe I am a leader. I need to learn how to do this. So I can definitely connect a through line from that tough discussion, tough love, to 4 years ago when I became the CEO of Baker Donelson.
One thing that comes to mind on that is I'm really curious. Did he stay on you like that, or did he kind of just plant the seed, give you the ownership, and then kick you out there?
Well, no, he definitely was it's interesting. He's definitely stayed on me, and then at some point when I was really stepping up and really I was getting more and more about it, figuring it out, and realizing I needed to own the projects and stuff. Some point there was a tipping point where I became more like he viewed that he could really trust me, and became very loyal, almost to a fault about things, and ensuring my pathway within the firm, talking about me to others and giving me opportunities, making sure I then had that trajectory to become, partner and things like that. But he definitely would stay on me. He didn't, it was a long time before that gruffness and everything kind of, waned. But, the end of the story, which is, I'm very honored by this, that when he passed away about a decade ago, his family asked me to speak at his funeral. So it was a really neat, I could share, about all I'd learned from him. And so anyway, it's a great question, Cam, because you're right. You can't, don't just go.
The reason I ask is because I think that's really interesting. A lot of the times when you as the leader see potential in somebody, you can really push them in a way that can drive them away from that exact thing. It's almost like, like we were talking rugby. If I want my son to play rugby, fictional son, sorry, no, that's not an announcement, Dad. Don't get too excited. If I want my fictional
son.
Sorry,
Miss Suzanne and I are upset right now.
But if I want my fictional son to play rugby, the last thing I want to do is drag him to every single rugby thing and give him a rugby ball and all that kind of stuff, because you can push him too far that way that he repels back. And so I'm curious what your perspective would be on that balance there of giving you the pushing, staying on you so that you did develop yourself, but not pushing you so hard that you were like, I don't want to be a leader of anything ever again.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Cam. You're right. It was a fine line, because I don't know. Now that I really unpacked the question, I don't know that he, like, a couple months later said, hey, what are you doing to become a better leader? There was certainly a self-starter part of me that I'm like, I really enjoy this. I was doing bankruptcy work, commercial corporate bankruptcy work, which is all about fixing problems. And that had resonated with me, even though, like I said, I had no vision to do it. But I was like, I really am starting to enjoy this. I need to get better at this. So I had some self-starter part. I think where he pushed me was to get better. So I never felt like he's trying to make me this cookie cutter leader type thing to take on. It was more just the natural progression of, he was kind of harsh on me in the feedback, but it was with a little bit of like tough love kind of feedback to help me get better at what he now knew I wanted to try to accomplish. Right. So, I know you both talk a lot about purpose, and that really, at some point, that light bulb went off about my purpose here and what I could do. And then he just facilitated that by kind of continuing to stay on me to make sure I was getting better. But you're right. I could see that. If he had been all about, well, go do this leadership course and read this book and report back to me, that probably wouldn't have resonated. So there was a self-starter type thing. And I do have a daughter who's now 25, and there's very little that I would encourage her to do a lot, and then she would actually do it. So, I learned that lesson too, that it's that balance, right? What's in it for me, right? That's what.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you see? Because you brought up the fact that he was, got angry. I refer to that as the trash can kicker
Right.
style of leadership,
Absolutely.
right? Did you see his style change, and how did you see that and model your leadership after?
Yeah, I did see it. It is interesting, right? Because I think obviously everyone's on a different journey, and you learn from what you saw, what resonated, what didn't. And so I did ultimately learn, like I knew that I didn't want to be that early on Bob leader as I grew, because that just didn't really inspire me. But he did, mellow's not the right word, but I think he on his own would say over time, he would tell others that I guess my more really thinking about the emotional intelligence side of things. We didn't call it that then, but the more people, the building a community type idea that really resonate with me. I mean, he told people that I wore off on him a little bit too over the years. We got to work together for about 15 years. And so I did see him morph and become more, he didn't ever become warm and fuzzy, and not that any of us should be that. I mean, you don't get too far that extreme, but he did make some progress that I think ultimately he saw some even greater success in how he was leading and everything, just because, right, it's a balance, I think. But and the same thing, I still to this day, I mean, I probably err on the side where I don't yell. I mean, I don't. I kind of take things out on inanimate objects in my office rather than yelling at somebody, right? I've had to buy a couple phones for my firm because I get the ladle and I just bang the phone when I'm angry. God,
I missed that phone. Those things were great
well,
for
they
that,
were, and
weren't
I don't
they?
have.
You can't
I
do
don't
that
have
with
it.
a
I
cell
don't have
phone.
it at home, but we still have them. Right here in my office. I've broken a couple of them, and I bought them. But I do think. I mean, you do have to be decisive, and you have to be. I think I did learn from him about being a little bit more over the years. I got more confident in the execution. So I think we learned from each other, and we both made different progress.
Was that conscious at all? Because I think that's a place that a lot of people get into where they have a leader above them that they might respect in a lot of different ways. I can hear the respect in your voice there. But then there's also, it's like, come on, you could be a bit of a dick. Whatever definition you put to it, we've all had leaders like that. How did you try to shape him a little bit? Or is it just I want to be a better leader, and he saw it in you, and that kind of modeling effect?
It was more the latter. I mean, I think I just wanted to be the best I could be, and I did want to make him proud about how I was growing in my ability to develop business and to handle legal matters and to do all that. And so I think it was, again, that was one of those, I wanted to make him proud because of his loyalty and pouring into me. But I didn't try to change him. Like I said, I think over time, that loyalty and then that relationship built where I did start doing some things about where I could actually grow my leadership skills. Like at some point I ended up with a paralegal reporting to me, and I ended up with a young lawyer now reporting to me, and I would get them together once a week on what I called a coffee break. And I would talk about leadership, or I would invite someone from the firm, a more senior leader, come in and say, what was their journey like? How did they become a better leader? And so I think he saw that, and I'm sure that had some impact that but I never set out to say, hey, Bob, quit being such a jerk, to people.
Well, you led by example, right? I've had this question from clients and people that, we'll call them want to be clients, because they, one of my other jokes is they say, well, can you coach my CEO, because, he really needs it. But what you did is you said, well, I'll just set the example. You said, Bob, I like you, I trust you, I believe in you, but you do some things I'm not going to do, which is great. How did you shift from this being the lawyer, a member of the firm, to I want to be a better leader? When did you have a moment where it's like, dang, I need to read that book or go talk to these people and learn more, or what?
Great question, Otis. I mean, it really was with that challenge on going to the court hearing. And I can say, I got the next day, I just went to the bookstore because, of course, there was no Amazon and stuff back then, and bought up all these books. But I did say, okay, he views me as a leader. I need to know even what that means. And I think at the time, one of the bestsellers was that John Maxwell book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And I remember very early on picking up and reading that book. And then I think in there, Maxwell has this concept of investing in yourself. And so I would say, well, I need to read other books. I need to, at that point you got, you could get CDs or cassette tapes of books on tape or things, or podcasts, but I went to a couple leadership conferences. So I really did take that. And then over time, it just really became this passion to want to learn and to soak up and be curious. That kind of grew out of all that. And then it was just, another thing I did when I mentioned CDs and cassettes is I have about a 30-minute commute, each way, it's not bad depending on where a lot of places you live. But that was an hour of time I could use listening to leadership materials or ways to develop, in that way, rather than sports radio or the news, which I enjoyed and what I normally did. But I was like, okay, that's a lot of downtime that I can, again, investing time and resources in myself. So I didn't do this all the time. And I'm not saying it's like, hey, I had it all figured out. But those are just some things that, a long time ago that I was really working on. And those seeds, they build on itself, right? As you invest in it. And so.
As you went and developed as a leader, kind of kept chipping away at it, getting better and better. Going up through the firm, I'm curious, did you have any big jumps? CEO would be the obvious one. I can also imagine somewhere along the line where it's like, okay, I went from one person to 15. Holy crap, what am I doing? Could you take us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is holy crap, what am I doing? Because I do have a little bit of that struggle with that imposter syndrome even to this day. But I'm working on that. Well, I think that's a great question. So it did start with leading, one young lawyer and one paralegal, but then over time, as the practice grew, I ended up, having others join the team, and so it expanded a little bit. But I think the next real big shift of amount of people and the, what am I going to do now that I've got this large number of people, was when I changed firms for some law firms for opportunities, and I was building a team out, which was the same type of process. But about 2 years in, I was asked to end up being the managing shareholder of an office. At the time, I joined Baker Donelson, which at the time was about 200 or 300 lawyers. Now we're 650 or 700. But our office had about 60 to 70 lawyers and another 50 or 60 staff that now I'm in charge of managing. And so that was a pretty big, significant jump up. And so it's the same thing, just trying to continue to invest in myself. One of the things that I thought was really helpful, because I was somewhat new to the firm and I didn't know everyone, is I scheduled individual lunches or lunches with one or two people at a time to, get their perspective. First of all, to get to know who they are and what their practice is, or if it was a business services professional, what they did, but also to get their view of what had worked well in the past with the firm. What are some things that you think the firm could do better? Because the office I joined had actually just joined into the bigger firm a couple of years before I did. So they had a lot of opinions about what had gone well in that merger, what hadn't. And now here's a new leader who was listening to them. So that was the step. And then I did that for about 5 years. And I thought 5 years is a good, window of time. It also happened to be as a bankruptcy lawyer in the, great recession or whatever we called it back in 2008, 2009. I was very busy. So I thought, okay, it's a good time to step back. And then our CEO at the time said, okay, that's great. We want you to start a new practice group around financial institutions, because we did a lot of work for banks, but there wasn't a structure. So then I started building that out, because I always liked the new challenge and everything. And that ended up being about 80 to 100 lawyers and then some other staff. And that was probably the next step before I became CEO, which was, like I said, about 4.5 years ago. So it was a progression of bigger groups and learning and making mistakes. And a lot of it, to me, it comes back down to, people building those relationships, the community. I know you talk about the tribe. Like, no matter how big the tribe, they have to get to know and trust and think of me as authentic. So I really spent a lot of time there. And then really a lot of it, because it drives me, the whole idea of what is our purpose. When I became the managing shareholder of the office here in Birmingham for Baker Donelson, like I said, the merger had just happened about 3 or 4 years ago. So we were trying to figure out, what is the role of Baker Donelson now in Alabama? Because they knew our predecessor firm, but who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we build this out? What do we want the community to know about us? And that was a very helpful exercise. So again, I think it's a bigger number of people, but the same kind of philosophies and approaches has worked well. So,
have you seen? Because I've seen this, and maybe it's of course it's perspective, but it has to deal with that professional industry. Like this morning, I had a dentist appointment. And I'm like, all right, who's in charge here? Who's really running the show? Is it the dentist? Is it the office manager? And I've got a couple of really good friends in the law industry, and one of them used to work for one of those big firms, and man, the leadership in that firm was terrible. But what I'm really getting at is through your experiences, because I think you really bring a unique experience being a bankruptcy lawyer too, because you get to see all these other businesses. Is what's that? How does that fit in the as a law firm? Because it's generally speaking not. I mean, there's a lot of individuals who do. You got to do your times. I just drew a blank on the right. I was going to be really smart and use that lawyer term. And billable hours. There we go.
Yes.
You got to do your billable hours. You got to hit that number, and you got to do all that. There's a lot of individualism in that firm because of that. How do you bring that together as a team?
Yes, you are spot on, Otis. That it is it can be challenging in I mean any organization, but professional services firms. I mean, it's a very flat organization, so it's not like a huge hierarchy that you can just say do it and so let it be done, right? I mean, you really have to build the buy-in and the support through the relationships. And it is, I mean, in addition, lawyers on the spectrum of when you do all those tests that people can do, they're very skeptical lot generally. They don't trust authority because that's what we pay lawyers for, right? You want them to be skeptical and think nothing's the truth so they can represent you well. And then they also are very highly educated, and many of them think they're the smartest people in the room. And so I'm just being honest, right? I live with them every day. So that's why I think it does come back to really, as it relates to the lawyers, really understanding what drives them, who they are, what their journey has been, where we're trying to go, and how that they fit into the vision that we've cast, and how we can help them achieve it if they buy in and will come along with us. So I think some of it is that because the highest performers, I mean, our highest performers could walk out the door any day to another law firm who's willing to pay them more money. So they have to believe in our vision, the ethos of our firm, what we're trying to accomplish, our culture, and see a part of it. Now, as it relates to business services and staff, that's also equally important to me because I want everyone to know they have a role. And I love your example of the dentist office because I think, I talk a lot around our people that everyone's a leader and everyone can build these trusted relationships with clients. And whether you deal with external clients, that's one relationship, but you also have internal relationships that you have to build trust with. And so I think trying to encourage everyone to think like that helps us all row together. Now, you have some lawyers who don't think they know everything. They don't want to listen to these business professionals. But of course, I've really worked hard to make sure that the business professionals have not only a seat at the table, but have a voice at the table, and that we really talk about that. So try to work that into our culture. Matter of fact, last year, I wanted to use a visual. So I actually had, batons from those relay races where you pass the baton. Mm-hmm. I had batons made up that said, I'm passing the baton with my name on it and our logo. And I called the business services directors and chiefs up in front of all of our firm leaders and said, I'm passing the baton as a symbol that, look, they've got responsibility, they got accountability, but we need to listen to them. They went to business school, they went to whatever, marketing school. So anyway, those are just some ways I've approached it, but you're right, right, Otis. It's you really have to be intentional about doing that.
Could you talk a little bit more about how you kind of bridge that gap between the two? Because we talk a lot about this on the show of how important it is to connect those two different departments inside the business. Usually it's marketing and sales. That's like kind of the easy example. You've got a more complicated situation there where you do have a similar kind of ego problem like you do with the sales team to the marketing team. How do you make that connection and not just in a like, all right, everyone has to work together way, but get that genuine connection where they are working together, they're getting lunch together, all of those kind of things.
Right. Well, that's another great question because you're right. And by the way, I mean, I sound like we've got all figured out, and none of this is easy. I mean, these are just things we're trying to do and get better at, right?
Right.
But I mean, some of it is it would be very easy for me to, not easy. It would, I could, whenever I have an opportunity to present to the firm, whether it's a town hall or if we have an in-person meeting, I could do the financial presentation about the firm, but I asked our CFO to do it that's kind of like a subtle hint or shift that I trust him. We at our last shareholder retreat, which is all our owners of the firm are together, I had our Chief Marketing Business Development Officer moderate a panel of some of our highest performing shareholders talking about how they build trusted relationships. And so I think some of that, it's a visual, but it's also they get some time in front of people to shine. Our Chief Operating Officer is like, we're locked at the hip on when we do presentations and everything, just because I want people to know that we trust each other. So those are some of the ways we do it, to try to and I talk about it but to actually walk the walk and have them be out front. Now that can be challenging because you have some lawyers who say maybe the the chief IT officer says, well, we don't need to have everyone have I don't know what, I can't remember what the other phone system is than Apple, right? I mean, you have to get rid of, yeah, right. Well, I love Blackberries, but even more current, although that's a great example, Otis, because I think that was early on when I was in the role. I mean, there might have been a few, it wasn't Blackberries, but there was something. It's like, we were trying to be all things to all people. And like our IT guy said, this is opening up to some security issues and everything. So I had to have his or her back when they make decisions. And invariably the attorney comes running to me thinking, I want to, and that's something I've had to learn because I tend to be on that. I want to be a people pleaser, that whole imposter syndrome thing. And I've got to have the backs of those folks. It doesn't mean that we have to do everything they say, because they make bad decisions like I make bad decisions. We have to be able to talk about it. So those are some things that we try to live out and do. But I can't, it's just as a continuing thing, right? To keep working on it.
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show is brought to you by Evergood Adventure Wine.
Our loyal listeners know Evergood's founder, Matthew Hexter, and our good friend from his appearances on the show that have never disappointed. And Evergood Adventure Wines doesn't disappoint either.
No, it doesn't. Evergood is a craft winery from Colorado that makes wine from lemons, not grapes.
That's right. Picture this, adult lemonade.
Oh yeah, perfect for your next backyard barbecue or hanging out with friends at the beach or the pool. No need to drink a warm red grape wine when it's 100 degrees out or much hotter here in Tucson. Evergood over ice is the perfect refreshment for a hot summer day.
And they come in a variety of flavors, including lemon, strawberry, lime, my favorite for margaritas, grapefruit, and watermelon, which comes in a cool pouch, by the way. These non-carbonated wines check all the boxes: gluten-free, vegan, low sugar, and low in sulfites. Best of all, they taste damn good, and they have fun names too.
Yeah, like their OG lemon wine called Skierpy. Yeah, y'all heard that one right, Skierpy. And I'll tell you, Skierpy is also one of my favorites.
Evergood now ships to 41 states, so you can order your lemon wines online at evergoodadventurewines.com.
Plus, Matthew is being kind enough to offer 20% off for all of our listeners. Just use promo code CAM-OTIS at checkout to get 20% off and start enjoying these amazing lemon wines.
So y'all go to evergoodadventurewines.com or click the link in the description in the show. Click Buy Now to redeem your Cam and Otis Show exclusive discount. When you took over and became the CEO, did you assume the culture and the vision, or were there things that in the culture that you had seen that you were like, all right, now here I am, finally we can shake that out and not do that anymore?
That's a great question. Well, so I was drawn when I joined Baker Donelson by some of the culture that I knew of from the outside, and it's the reason I've continued to stay here, because of some of the baseline of the culture. And it really goes back, the Baker is Senator Howard Baker, who is very much viewed as somebody, you still see occasionally references to him about, he was somebody that, crossed the line and would be very respectful and listening and respect new ideas and change ideas, so that kind of respect for diversity of views, and everything. I think so. We really try to encourage that. So that culture base was pretty solid, and it's how that everyone's important, and the voices should be heard. But one thing that we had to do, I think, it's as a profession, the legal industry has become more like a business rather than the traditional just partnership type model. And so one thing that I did come in saying we needed to shift was the most successful firms out there were operating like best run businesses, is what I called it, because our clients are running like a best run business. And a lot of times law firms didn't back in the day. I think some of it, about accountability and having expectations and elevating expectations. So that part of the culture I've been trying to infuse. I don't want it to impact negatively the other parts of the culture, which it could. You could get very far on the extreme of it's all about the bottom line. And I frankly, I'm not driven by the bottom line and the dollar. I mean, we need those to be able to do market pay and to serve our clients well and to keep the lights on. And I think if we're all focused on the purpose and what we're trying to accomplish in serving our clients, the financial results will come. So I really think where I've been focusing on the transforming the culture has been more about that, about being a best run business while maintaining the civility and the servant attitude like Senator Baker had.
How did you actually go through the process of, like, basically I'm picturing like you write out the whole vision. It's like, okay, these out of these 10 things, these 9 we're keeping, we're getting rid of this one. Here are my 5 ideas. I can only take 2 of them, and going through, like, what did that literal process look like? Because I think that's something that it sounds very difficult. It's very abstract talking about vision, let alone improving and changing the vision while trying to keep everything still intact. So what did that look like?
Yeah, well, another great question. So I had a 6-month transition, and we had a pretty lengthy search process. It was an internal search, but I jokingly talk about, or lovingly joke about, my 50-page questionnaire, because of course this was my predecessor had been in the role for 20 years, so this was the first time it was transitioning to somebody, and so it was a lot of questions about that, and we had a pretty strong basis of a culture and a strategy. So in the search process, which then led into the transition, and I had put together a transition council to help me think through it, I really focused on a couple core things because we had plateaued financially, which then impacted other aspects of our ability to retain talent and to attract talent. I mean, it flows out of that, of course. And so what I talked about was, again, we need to think about it being a best run business. We need to really continue to enhance a culture of business development. We had people who were working really hard on the billable hour, to Otis's point, but we weren't being as focused about going out and developing new business. And so that was plateauing. So culture of business development. The centers of excellence was another thing I talked about. Was just, again, none of this is rocket science, right? Like, what does the market say we're the best at? And then let's double down there if it's, so we identified some core centers of excellence, and then really innovation. I mean, that was kind of the thing that we actually have some real leadership in the legal profession in innovation and legal project management, but our people hadn't adopted it as much. And so I thought we needed to move to this idea of I am innovation. It's not fancy gadgets, but I can help innovate by talking to my clients about it. So that was in that transition in the first year, and then COVID hit. It really was around this best run business and some of those concepts I can unpack and talk about. Then we launched a 5-year vision last year, and that's actually a little bit of a different, how do you build and meld on that and how that all happened. It's a little bit of an interesting story, but that's kind of how I worked through the transition to maintain our current culture, but to realize we needed to elevate some expectations about what we were doing. And it didn't help that while I was it didn't help me. It was a pretty stressful time, but in my 6-month transition, we had a fiscal year end. Our fiscal year ends January 31st, and it was our worst fiscal year end ever. So there was that whole, I don't like the phrase, but never never miss the opportunity to use a crisis, for good or whatever. So we had people we had to become a best run business because while trying to maintain the culture. So that helped to facilitate stuff probably a little faster. And we did get it turned around, but then COVID hit. So,
I'm blanking on who it is. There's the CEO of, I think it was GE, that he, like, within his first month he blew up one of their biggest factories, and it's like, you got pretty lucky.
Oh
The
yeah,
factory blew up right before you became the CEO. That's pretty good.
right,
Go
right.
ahead, Ben. I saw you had one.
Yeah, well, no, that's true, and really that leads to my question, which is all having been a bankruptcy lawyer for a long time. What's some business lessons from the outside looking at those guys that you've gleaned, and I mean either implemented into your firm or just wow, okay, don't push the red button on Thursdays sort of thing.
Right. Well, and it is interesting because it's kind of like that whole thing when you buy a new Camry, then everyone's buying a Camry, right? I mean, everyone's driving a Camry around you. You just notice it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of law firm leaders who have a bankruptcy background for whatever reason, and it wasn't. I didn't use that for the. I said we had a rough year. I mean, it wasn't like restructuring the company. It was more. But I think the skills do matter because bankruptcy is interesting. It's a pretty small bar of lawyers in the sense like it's a small community. You can go to, and bankruptcy court is a federal court where you're arguing in front of a judge. You don't have juries, so things can move along pretty quickly. And you can go and you can litigate the heck out of something. But most bankruptcy lawyers, most good bankruptcy lawyers, recognize you're going to do better for your client if you can work something out in advance of a trial, right? Because then you can control the outcome. And so I think some of the skills I've built is that whole idea of listening to opponents' views. And in bankruptcy, there's multiple constituents too, which is another unique thing. You have a creditors committee. You may have a bank, that's involved. You have the company. You have the employees. You may have a labor union. So there's all these constituents who all have views about how this thing should go. None of them they're all angry that you're in this situation. How do we come together and make all these constituents work? So I do think that skill set, and I represented banks. So I came in like, in some sense, the 800-pound gorilla. We've got the bank debt. We've got security interest and everything. But my bank clients didn't want to take back a nursing home, and operate it, right? Or a hospital, which I did a lot of healthcare banking. So what can we do to make this work? And so I do think those skills are transferable into business because you've got all these constituents. You're trying to do the best outcome for everybody. So that's kind of how I've approached it. And it goes back to people and relationships, because unless you build that trust and authenticity with opposing lawyers, they're not going to listen to you and listen to your point of view. And so.
Did you glean any of these leadership lessons from? Sorry, I'm just realizing I said glean confidently. I'm not sure that's the right word. But did you take any of those leadership lessons from some of those clients? You talk about working a lot in the healthcare field. You're going through the process, getting ready to for the bankruptcy trial. And then you're going through and you're like, oh my gosh, they did this wrong. It's like, you hired this guy, you did this. And you could take those kind of lessons. Like, is that where some of your leadership came from?
That's a great question. I hadn't thought. I definitely would say the financial aspect of it, because I was a mass communication major in college, and so I felt. And one of the biggest cases I had as probably a 10-year lawyer was my client was a banker, but she also was a CPA, and so I had to go take a deposition of the other side's CPA expert on valuation issues. And I was like thinking, I'm going to embarrass myself to my client who knows all this stuff. I'm just so I definitely, I spent a ton of time teaching myself and trying to learn it. And she's taught me over the years, and she's still a very good friend from those days in the trenches. And so we still represent her. But so I definitely picked up the financial acumen, but I absolutely have seen things, and I really hadn't thought about that, Cam, but how you treat employees when you're in a crunch, right? That they are your most valuable asset in a financial distress. And again, no matter if you're in financial distress or not, you need to be able to treat your employees well and get to understand what are their biggest concerns. So I do think, and in a lot with the healthcare space, you've got to deal with government regulators, right? They're coming in and checking, how you're doing on your surveys of how you're treating patient care and customer care. And you can, when you walk through a facility where it's not being done, it's very noticeable. And so I'm sure that's infused me over the years because we all, both of you probably have seen, I have been a patient in at a hospital, urgent care or whatever, where you've had great care or horrible client service and care. So, I do certainly picked up on some of that.
You mentioned a little bit about the vision, the Baker Vision 2028.
Right.
It sounds like there's a good story that goes along with that. So I'd love to learn more about that.
Well, it was interesting because obviously came in and was doing this best run business stuff. Things are going well, but then like the board's like, okay, that's great. We're cleaning up stuff. But what's the longer term strategy? I mean, I had ideas, I had some pieces of it, but so I impaneled a strategic planning committee, which I think what you're supposed to do to have different voices. And every time we got together, it ended up devolving into, we have an interest. This is a very positive thing about our firm, but we have individuals who have a very national practice, like they practice all over the country. We have others who are very local and some are regional. We're in 10 states, so it's more of a regional focus. And we're primarily Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. So every time we got that group together, you'd have all these different opinions. Well, we need to become more of a national firm because that's what their practice was. Or we should focus and double down on getting to become the best firm in every one of our local markets. To everyone knows us as the top, or regional, or we need to grow this geography or that geography. And it just was a spiral. It wasn't heated discussion. It was hard to get some kind of consensus. And so finally, after a couple meetings and everything, I just said, I just need to go away for a couple days by myself. I've got all this feedback and input about who we are, who we want to be. I've read all this stuff about strategic planning. And so our COO, at the time, she had a cabin up in Banner Elk, North Carolina. And I said, I'm just going to go up there for a couple days by myself and spread this all out. And so I did all that. And I had a big, whiteboards, and I've got, index cards.
Did you literally put it all out on the floor too?
It was a big table. That's right. And I had articles I'd read and highlighted and all my notes from all the meetings. And it really was. I finally got like every bullet point of an idea was on a different index card. And I had that all spread out and saw how they fit together. And then I had, I don't know, like a whiteboard, like a cardboard size whiteboard, and I was marking things up. And I joke about that. I literally came, because it was up in the mountains. I literally came down the mountains with my 2 tablets. It really was on 2 tablets, but it was all this idea about, and again, nothing new under the sun. It was about, we need to be trusted advisors to each client with deep industry expertise and proactive strategic advice and counsel, which is exactly what the clients want. Like I said, I mean, Meister wrote about trusted advisor 20 some years ago. But if you unpack what does it mean to be a trusted advisor, if we could get better at that, it's directly responding to our clients who want us to know their industry and help them mitigate risk and know what's coming down the pike and know their company. And so anyway, but it was funny. I still joke, and I still have them somewhere. I think they're at my house, the 2 tablets of Baker Vision.
That's awesome.
How did you connect? Because you talked about some of the different people wanting these different ideas. Then you came up with the vision, the 5-year plan. How did you connect them to that? To where it's either they saw themselves in it, or you lawyered them enough where they believed it.
No, well, that exactly right. And we built out a charter that really talked about where we were going, why we're going. We launched it at a retreat where I talked exactly about the why and the who, and to see your place in it, because that's what, it was a very inclusive vision for everyone in the firm. If you have a national practice, we want to help you grow it and become even more as a trusted advisor at the C-suite level of national clients. If you're local, let's help you get better to really help local officials or local companies navigate the issues they're dealing locally by really getting to know that industry and that market. This is where it was very critical to me that it's not just the lawyers. For our business services and staff folks, they can build these trusted relationships within the firm, and they have a part of it too. And if we do all of that well, then like I said, I think the economic stuff will come. But we set up some measures on engagement of our people. We want to increase and become an industry leading firm in engagement. We want to check how we're doing in branding. I don't care so much about that we're a branded law firm, but what do our clients think? And there's some surveys that they interview people, not necessarily saying, what do you think about Baker Donelson? They say, who are the trusted lawyers you work with? And we've been able to see year over year growth as we've been trying to really help our colleagues get better at this. And we did build out a whole talent training program for lawyers and for business services and staff. I call it a trusted advisor mini MBA. People who have real MBAs, I'm not trying to minimize that because I know that's a lot of hard work, but it's just a way to put a phrase around it where we're having training, in person and virtual, because it puts some meat behind it. So we really did try to encapsulate all of taking words of a vision, but how do we infuse it and live it out every day under this charter? So we're trying to do that. And a year and a half in, we've had seem to have good buy-in, and we're continuing to try to get better. And then we've had 3 years of record growth, record performance. So it seems to be working. So we'll keep learning from it and getting better.
This episode of the Cam and Otis Show is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose.
Are you tired of dealing with the cost of bad leadership? It's time to make a change.
The Green Beret Leadership Program is your key to unlocking the full potential of your team.
By using GBLP to develop leaders in your business, you'll get a proactive and responsible team that embraces challenges, takes calculated risks, and takes action without constant supervision.
Developing great leaders can take a lot of time and energy, and that's why businesses tend to opt for the trial by fire and the school of hard knocks path to leadership. The truth is that wastes time and money. And folks, there's never enough of either one of those, and puts lots of extra stress on your leadership team.
Oh yeah, and that stress has lots of bad outcomes for your team. Poor leadership drives away your quality talent, and the longer you wait to fix the problem, the more talent you're going to lose and the more money you're going to lose.
With the Green Beret Leadership Program, you can use battle-tested leadership principles of the Green Berets to develop great leaders in your team faster than with the School of Hard Knocks. You'll see changes in just a few short weeks.
And the longer you wait to take action, the more damage poor leadership can do and will do to your business.
Learn more about the impact of GBLP, that's the Green Beret Leadership Program, can have on your business, and schedule your free coaching call with the Green Beret coach. That's me, folks, Otis. Now at findyourpurpose.coach/GBLP. I'll say it again, findyourpurpose.coach/GBLP, or you can click the link in the description below.
Y'all, don't leave your team to struggle alone on their own. If you're not giving them the tools they need to be great, then they're not going to be great. You can't expect them to. So give them the tools they need to be successful.
That's awesome. And what I think, and this may be a little deeper than you want to go, maybe a little deeper than we all want to go, because you start looking at the time, but because I find it interesting, because those sort of strategies, what you talked about, are great and wonderful, but it's the joke of, well, I want to make more money.
Right.
Okay. Well, here's a dollar bill. You just made more money. So I want to have more related. I would love, if you don't mind, could you share, however you're measuring it, whether you call it MOEs or KPIs or what, how are you measuring the success?
Right. Well, no, I'm glad to share it. So, I mentioned the engagement surveys we're doing annually. That's one thing. It's not I'll get to we're doing the brand awareness by this external group. We've identified what we call our strategic clients, which are the clients that we do work in more than one line of business, because we know that's a stickier client and we tend to have an elevated position with them. So we're trying to move core clients, which are maybe clients that we have one line of business, to become more strategic, having 2 or 3 lines of business. So we're measuring that year over year. And then we do have the economic piece of it. For the senior lawyers, it's share value. We are professional corporations, so we have share value increases is one way that we test that and look at that. But then for everyone else, we have implemented tried to take to another level the feedback loop. It used to be that you would do feedback on your staff and your business services professionals, and everyone. I mean, basically in the past, everyone who was breathing and still at the firm would get like a 2 or 3 or whatever COLA raise every year, and there really wasn't distinguishing for the ones who were really outperforming the high achievers. So we've really worked hard to implement that. More of a scale of people that are really the high performers can really succeed economically And so, and they have. And then this past year was our, I said a couple of years, last year was a record year. And we realized in looking at the market that we were a little below market on a lot of the staff and business services professionals. So we gave increased raise because we had done better. And so it really all does tie together. I mean, sometimes I know it's hard if you're not a shareholder here. If we talk about share value in a vacuum, they're like, well, that's great. That's just for the senior lawyers feathering their, pockets. But it really does. We all work together. It helps the firm to accomplish more, and it helps everyone to get paid more. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, Otis, but we have a lot of tests and metrics that we're following and tracking and holding myself and our leadership team accountable to.
There's one area that I think you could provide a especially interesting perspective into, because one big problem for a lot of businesses, whether lower level employees all the way up to the top, is meeting efficiency, like just how long meetings can be, how inefficient they can be. I'm sorry, but I got to imagine you get a room of a bunch of lawyers, all that lawyer speak, that could go on for days, weeks even, I would have to guess. What are some lessons you have to reel in those people and keep the meetings on track? All those kind of little lessons. Because I think if you could keep 10 lawyers on track and do a 30-minute meeting, I mean, we could pass that off, trademark it, give it to everybody.
Well, I would want that trademark stuff too. But no, it's interesting because we just came out of 3 days of board meetings, and we get together 3 times a year in person, and it was a lot of talking, but that's what I wanted, right? I set up you're exactly right on your point. I think one of it is coming into the meeting with an agenda, but also the outcome. What is the outcome I or whoever the leader that's putting it together wants to accomplish, and then really building the agenda and how you use your time to accomplish that outcome. Our outcome for the board meeting was with our fiscal year, January 31st, we just came through our first half of the fiscal year. The outcome I wanted from that August meeting last week was I want us to get all the things in place to finish this year strong while continuing to invest in the future and trying to navigate that, because obviously there's some economic headwinds out there in the short term. And so we had a lot of different thoughts and policies and procedures and inputs. And I think we came through with really stacked hands, keep driving the vision and keep executing. So I think that idea of really having the outcome is important, because, and we have, we have moved some in-person meetings to virtual if there's no reason to have it. And really trying to be more intentional about it. One other thing, it's a little bit tangential, but it's really a big part of our culture that the leadership gets around the different offices. But as we've grown every year, that becomes harder and harder. And, I'm charged with driving the vision and driving lateral growth and maybe, acquiring groups or mergers. It's harder for me to get to all 22 offices every year. But when we have a department heads meeting or 4 business unit meeting or the board, we move it around so that then I'm in that market, our leaders are in that market, and we can do that. So that's not necessarily the meeting itself that is being maximized, but we're trying to maximize our time. But I do have some folks smarter than me put together a best practices meeting guide for our firm, and I'm glad to send it to you. Like I said, there's nothing new under the sun there, but it is helpful, and I pull it out as a reminder. So
we would be remiss if we didn't talk about your give back to the community. Everybody leads, right? Did I remember the name?
It
right?
is. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So tell us about what Everybody Leads is about and how it got started.
Right. So I appreciate that. So a couple of years ago, I've got a leadership coach, and he asked me, what's Tim plus 5 years and Tim plus 10 years? Because I'm in this role. I've launched a vision that goes another, 5 years, 4 years now. But what next? Because the firm structure, I could get back into full-time practice of law. But I really enjoy leadership. I really am passionate about it. And so I said, well, maybe I would transition to go help work at lead a nonprofit somewhere. And he said, well, why don't you start one? It's like, thanks, Bob. His name was also Bob. So anyway, I guess the Bob's in my life. Anyway, so as we unpacked this, started talking about it, I really am passionate about leadership. And then I realized through interacting with other nonprofits that our firm interacts with, we're trying to help eradicate homelessness in our footprint through some nonprofits. talking to them, those nonprofits are doing great work on like basic life skills, like getting jobs and getting bank accounts opened and how to professionally dress and do interviews. But then once you have a job, there's sort of that level of leadership, like conflict resolution and showing up, and how do you have tough discussions. And so I really built out this curriculum to go into sort of what I would call underserved communities. Maybe it's people reentering life from prison, or disadvantaged areas of community with youth that have had struggles, to try to just teach some basic leadership skills to help them along their way. And so it's a work in process. I've been doing some work with some nonprofits here in Birmingham just to go in and do it. And it's pretty rewarding to see some light bulbs come on, and even just talk to people about they are a leader, even though they may not feel like it, and even though they've made mistakes in the past. So a lot more still to come, but I really enjoy doing it.
I love it. Your coach Bob would ask you the same questions I would have asked you, and gave you very similar guidance that I would have given you too. Is like,
yep.
What are you waiting on next week?
Yeah, I know. Well,
is next week going to be
right, because like 5 years from now, I can go start to look for a nonprofit job. You should just start one today, and let's spin it up now. It may not turn into anything, but it's been good. So good, yeah.
But the point is that why wait?
Mm-hmm.
Will tomorrow, and that was kind of my point too, is will tomorrow be any better?
Yeah. No.
Will you have more time tomorrow? No, you'll have the same time tomorrow as you did today. Next week. Sorry. All right. Woo! Reel me back in, Camden, before I go full coaching mode on that one.
Gotta settle down.
Woo! Yeah. Because, part of the reason I was going full coaching mode, because you said this early on, and it is my favorite thing, and it is, to me, it is the essential lesson from the book, The Legacy, and it's my essential lesson and foundation as a leader. And legacy they refer to it as sweeping the sheds. Right. I refer to it as grab a shovel. The hole needs to be dug. Grab the shovel and start digging. Right. I mean, there's another version of that. If you need water, you can pray for rain, or you can start digging a well.
Right.
I mean, it's take that action and do something. And as a leader, it's not stand there with your hands on your hips, pointing to somebody else to do it. Hey, you ought to dig faster. You know what? You know what it is? It's getting that shovel, and that's what I really mean. And that's what I like about the sweeping the sheds, because the greatest rugby club of all time, those guys are in there cleaning up the locker room. And when I think about that, it gives me chills just to think about those guys, the Richie McCaws, the Mawananu. I mean, these guys that are the greatest in the world at their job are doing the chores just like everybody else. So it is always an opportunity to be reminded of that, is what I learned today. And that's a great lesson. So, Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Well, another reminder and another rugby one. So we're coming full circle back to rugby here. Tim, you had said this, that you use this a lot, as a leadership tool, but it's the what worked well, what didn't. That is something that in my rugby coaching, that's always everything we finish. It's like, hey, what's working, what's not working, what can we improve on? And when you approach it like that, the best thing, not only are you going to see what's working so that you can improve upon it and keep building there, you get to see what's not working so you can fix it and cover up those issues. But then also it gets the buy-in from the team is the biggest thing. I do that with the U of A boys, the college kids. I do it all the way down to the little kids at the Engage Foundation. And, the answers are completely different, but the skill set that they're getting from it is the exact same. It's look, I can analyze this. I can tell coach what I think is wrong, and then we can fix it as a team. And I think that's a great lesson, but I've got to add a fun one on this. Y'all were talking about, and I'm sure there's a proper term, but the older phones, like the analog phones, we might just have to take all the components out. You could probably manufacture them real cheap, just chunks of plastic, just to beat on. I think we can make a little money there. So we'll have to get on the call after this. All right, guys.
That's right.
There's something to be said for having that plastic hammer on your desk, isn't there?
There is.
Tim, how about you? What'd you learn?
Well, I think a couple things. I really did learn. I appreciate the value of both of you as coaches, because you've said a lot of things today, including like how you approach coaching, which I think are spot on. So I think that was one thing. I think the whole idea about acting and the reminder of acting, Otis, was really important, because we can talk about all these ideas, but unless your listeners are actually taking steps today on some of them, it becomes just words in the air. And then I think, the final thing, I really did appreciate, Camden, when you were just a reminder to me about being observational as I'm going through the day, when you were talking about what did I observe when I was, touring facilities as a bankruptcy lawyer. But that's just a really good reminder for all of us, just that we can learn from being more observational and thinking about how that could help us. So I know I did more than one, but a lot of good stuff today.
That's right. We never had the rule
Just like a
that it has
lawyer.
to be one. We never had that rule. We just tend to stick to it.
No, we don't. But I had to make my lawyer joke. I mean, it's just like a lawyer.
Yep.
I've got one thing, but I've got 2 points to go along with that one thing.
He learned
That's
one
right.
thing, but there's one A, one B, one C.
And I'm going to bill you for all 4 of them.
Oh, yes. Tim, how do folks find you, connect with you, see what's going on in Birmingham?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, and then probably the best way is BakerDonelson.com, BakerDonelson.com is the firm. And then we've also launched on the nonprofit a website, still in the process of being, it's there, but it's building. So give us some patience, but it's everybodyleads.org.
Awesome. Tim, man, it has been great and a lot of fun. We really appreciate your time today.
I really have been valued much more than anything I'd provided, Otis and Camden. It's really great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Tim Lupinacci, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at the Cam and Otis Show. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to share it with other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And as always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.